Chi. Born 1988, July 16th.
Right.
Flat neurograph, version 6. Good. All files in order.
Will this hurt?
It's just a scan. It'll hurt about as much as getting your picture taken.
Indians thought cameras would steal their souls.
But so. Huh. Let's hope they're wrong. Ready? Say cheese.
In the entertainment industry, a sleeper hit is a piece of media, whether it be a game, a song, or a film, that gradually builds success over time with very little promotional push. In the context of the gaming industry, a sleeper title might be a game which far exceeds expectations that it set for itself upon launch, with those expectations being set particularly in promotional material and press releases. Some typical recent examples of a sleeper hit in the gaming industry might be Doom, Titanfall 2, Firewatch, Rainbow Six Siege, and Rayman Legends. Although 2017 has seen a slew of great games both big and small, my personal favourite sleeper title of the year thus far has actually been the 2015 release, SOMA. SOMA is currently available on PC and PS4, and so many of you have already played it. Though with recent reports of the title coming to Xbox One sometime in the near future, it seems fitting to review the game once more spoiler-free, and then later on talk in depth about the game and its strengths and weaknesses some more. The game is developed by Frictional Games, the same studio behind the Amnesia and Penumbra titles. For new or prospective players, this video will be spoiler-free for the first segment before moving into some potential spoiler territory later on in the video, although I'll try and signpost this as explicitly as possible so that you can click away whenever suits your interest. The review segment of this video will split into several sections to cover graphics and performance, gameplay, sound and voiceover, and story and themes, before wrapping up on all of these different aspects of the game to give a rounded verdict of the game as a whole. The first section of this review will cover graphics and performance. I played SOMA on PC, and on PC the graphics settings menu is perfectly fine. It's nothing massively special. You can't independently tweak a variety of different settings like shadow, render distances and resolutions, though the selection you do get is more or less fine. The game isn't particularly demanding in the first place, and will run on basically any combination of modern computer hardware. Two particular options that I'd really like to point out are actually found in the game settings options rather than the video settings, and these are video distortion effect and colour separation. Your mileage may vary with these, however I actually turned colour separation off, as in the game it actually applies a thick chromatic aberration filter to the game when the player character is stressed. And whilst this may sound like it serves a big gameplay role, I actually found it to be detractive from the experience, and you can still tell when the character is stressed through other audio and visual cues, so the chromatic aberration is total overkill and I turned it off. In terms of minimum specs you might want, I've seen benches of people running the game on old 750 Ti's and R7 260 cards at 1080p with perfectly playable frame rates. On the CPU side of things, any modern CPU made in the last 5 or 6 years will be able to hold at least a mostly 60 FPS experience. The game does occasionally suffer from slight hitches when loading new assets, even from an SSD, though overall the performance of the game is brilliant as of 2017. The experience on the base PS4 comes in at a locked 1080p 30 frames a second. I haven't played this version of the game personally, but looking at the testing done elsewhere by other sites like Gaming Bolt, the frame rate is pretty solidly locked at the 30 FPS cap. The PS4 Pro Boost mode also runs at 1080p 30 FPS, as proper Pro support hasn't been provided for the game as of yet. Performance expectations for the Xbox One version of the game, and potentially any Xbox One X version, have not been explicitly given by the studio, though it's probably safe to also assume the same 1080p 30 FPS target will be in place. The third iteration of the HPL or HP Lovecraft engine is used in SOMA, and provides a pretty noticeable upgrade to the engine we've previously seen in other games by Frictional. Whilst the engine delivers well on the performance front, the quality of the graphics delivered can be a bit of a mixed bag. SOMA is by no means a slouch, by all accounts it's actually perfectly fine, and for a game created by an indie studio is definitely ahead of the curve. The problem, however, is one of consistency. The opening sequences of the game leave by far the worst impression in terms of graphics out of any section of the game. This may be a consequence of lighting, as many of the opening segments are brightly lit, and the first playable section of the game takes place in a naturally lit apartment. The lighting engine used ironically shines the brightest when scenes are at their moodiest, and so Simon's bright apartment can sadly look a little bit flat. Human NPCs you encounter in the first sections of the game can look really quite strange, with weird textures, awkward poses, robotic stares, and in some cases some very stilted animations. Thankfully, these first impressions are not typical of the rest of the game, as when you reach the dark main setting, the lighting is inherently more dim and human character models aren't going to be something that take up any amount of appreciable screen time. In some scenes, SOMA can actually look truly impressive, and the aesthetic design of the underwater setting is masterfully put together. Clearly taking cues from a variety of games such as Bioshock, Alien Isolation, and bringing forward ideas from Amnesia, which lends itself well to the overall oppressive and mechanical atmosphere of the game. Several sections of the game actually take place outside in the underwater environment, and here the lighting system is used to great effect to both impress and serve the gameplay, as soft lights come into view in the distance to guide the player to interesting landmarks that either progress in the game or unveil some more story exposition and world building. And now, moving on to gameplay. The game itself takes anywhere between about 9 and 11 hours for most people to complete, and probably for most people would offer very limited replayability. And a part of the reason for this is simply because most of the game's appeal lies elsewhere and not in the gameplay. It's mainly in the dialogue and the narrative. If limited replayability is going to be an issue to you going forwards, then SOMA may not be the game for you. However, I will say that if you do value single-player story-driven experiences, then SOMA is obviously going to appeal to you much more. A case in point really would be that I actually played this game for the first time a couple of months before making this video, and it stuck with me well enough, and for long enough, that I still feel compelled to make a video on it, even now. The moment-to-moment gameplay in SOMA is relatively straightforward, with the bulk of the game being made up of you slowly but surely progressing through the underwater bases of Pathos 2, by solving miniature, though varied and satisfying puzzles. These puzzle elements are broken up by other intermediate game mechanics. Much like Firewatch, a great amount of the appeal of the game resides in the interactions between the player character, Simon, and another in-game character who provides much of the exposition and guidance through the game, Catherine. I'll come back to this element of the gameplay later. Naturally, being developed by Frictional Games, SOMA cannot escape comparisons to Amnesia and other defenseless survival horror games such as Outlast. Some of these comparisons ring true. The nature of the gameplay puts SOMA a couple notches more interactive than a walking simulator game such as The Vanishing of Ethan Carter and Firewatch. Though this is by no means a negative of the game, simply a design decision which some people may love and some people may not be so fond of. Whereas many action games use narrative as a propped-up device as a vector for the gameplay, such as the case with most FPS story campaigns, games of this kind often do the opposite, using the core gameplay as a vector for exposition, world building, and progressing the plot. To this end, SOMA achieves this goal competently and engagingly enough to not get boring in the minutes of downtime between plot beats. Some of the puzzles, whilst generally simplistic, are built into the world convincingly and do add to the experience of the game. The simplicity of the puzzles and their solutions are a point of differentiation between SOMA and Amnesia. In Amnesia, many of the puzzles require acquiring several items or clues, combining them, and applying them in specific ways. This means solutions to some puzzles require the player to traipse around entire levels collecting the correct items, or making large and sometimes unintuitive logical jumps to reach a solution. This isn't the case in SOMA, where combining items isn't required of the player, and the vast majority of the puzzles in the game have all the elements for their solution within a small radius. This is something which will be a point of personal preference, though for myself and for those looking for games leaning more towards the walking simulator genre, this is a positive. I'm playing the game largely for plot and atmosphere. I'm not particularly interested in demanding and often arbitrarily obscure puzzle solutions. SOMA also uses monsters in conjunction with some tight level designs to force you through some tense scenarios which the game seems to want you to sneak through, in a perhaps similar fashion to Alien Isolation, though the system is by no means as robust as Alien Isolation due to a lack of real hiding spots and a threatening though fallible monster AI. This gameplay mechanic can be very hit and miss depending on the specific scenario, though in my experience is mostly a miss. The monster design is wonderfully Cronenbergian, and the existence of the monsters is accounted for in the plot, so their presence in the world doesn't seem at odds with the rest of the game. The issue with monsters in SOMA is more to do with their implementation. As mentioned, the game first introduces these monsters to you in what is essentially the tutorial section of the game, as a means to explain to you the stealth mechanics of the game, and thus the game sets the precedent of the use of stealth to bypass the big bads of the game. Indeed, much of the level design in monster-occupied areas seems to warrant the use of stealth, with lots of tight corridors, side rooms and shortcuts. In practice, however, the stealth system is sadly not robust enough to accommodate the amount of stealth the developers seemed to want of the player, with the distinct lack of hiding places being available to the player, meaning stealth ends up being synonymous with
just hiding around the corner from the enemy,
and with enemy AI simply being too dumb to create engaging encounters. Monsters will simply spot you, run at you, and give up if you get around another corner before they do. In some instances, the AI becomes frustrating in its simplicity, since it often makes the game challenging by just blocking the doorway you need to go through. This is not engaging or fun for the player, and the best solution is usually just to run around and get chased by the monster until the doorway opens up and you can sprint through it. This is the core problem with monsters in SOMA. In most cases, you will end up overcoming enemies by just running around loudly like a madman until you can get through that door that you need to. It does have moments where the stars align and the enemies put genuine disconcerting tension in the air, though these are fewer in occurrence than the other encounters of the frustrating kind. On PC, the monsters can be modded to not chase or bother the player, which some may choose, though I feel deviates from the intended vision of the developers and may worsen the experience for first-time players for those moments where the monsters do add to the atmosphere of the Pathos 2 setting. Now moving on to sound.
Oh god, he's dead? He's dead.
Sound design in SOMA is pretty great. Whether inside or out, there is an ever-present ambience given to the scene, which can reinforce whatever feeling the developers wanted to cultivate at that moment, whether it be relief, tension, or sadness. Sound effects are always of high quality and seem to match whatever actions are being played out on the screen, which is important in this genre of game. Character movement can range from anywhere between near silent and loud as all hell, which can fit very well into the core gameplay when trying to deal with monsters. Similarly, environmental cues can be worryingly loud, such is the case with opening and closing of doors, though sadly whether monsters hear these cues or not seems to be sporadic and inconsistent.
He's coming in full time, working the comics section.
That's Ashley's job.
Yeah, well, you know.
Forget it. Not doing her any favors by leaving an empty spot. Not like she's coming back.
Well, good luck. Hope they find a way to reverse the whole, dying thing.
Dying thing? You're the worst support ever.
What should I say?
I'll see you later, Jesse. Don't burn the place down while I'm gone.
Over and out, buddy.
I know they told you that field technicians would get full access throughout Pathos 2. I'm here to tell you that's not gonna happen.
Is that really important?
No, I mean, where did you work at Pathos 2?
I don't know what that is.
That's unexpected. Did you come directly from Toronto?
Yeah, I did. And it was very unexpected.
Have you seen any people? Like staff or field technicians?
Only robots.
Voice acting in SOMA really raises the bar. None of the cast give anything less than at least a notably good performance. Jared Zeus, best known as the voice of Nomad in Mirror's Edge Catalyst, who you probably avoided so that you didn't have to do crappy side quests, delivers a rich and believable performance as the plot protagonist Simon. Nell Mooney, who is apparently best known for her role as a dancer in the film Enchanted, also turns in a stellar performance, and the two have a great chemistry together throughout the bulk of the game. Conversations are varied in nature between Catherine providing guidance to Simon, and more human talks about identity and the personal beliefs and struggles of each character. Much like Firewatch is praised for its interactions between the two lead characters, I feel SOMA also does a really fantastic job of selling these characters through their dialogue and voice acting. Now moving on to story and themes. I'm going to keep this section short as to avoid spoilers for now, but we'll introduce the premise of the game and talk a little bit about the sort of topics the plot and characters touch upon. In SOMA, you play as Simon, a bookshop employee working in Toronto, who, as a consequence of a nasty car crash, requires neurological treatment to try and heal injuries to his brain. On one particular visit to an obviously questionable medical physician, Simon undertakes a new type of brain scan as a part of his treatment. At this point, something jarring occurs, and Simon wakes up in an underwater facility known as the Pathos 2 Project, with no idea how he got there, why he is there, or what he is to do. The first plot beats of the game, once at the Pathos 2 setting, then begin to play out to discover what has happened to Simon. Is Pathos 2 a reality or a dream, a consequence of the treatment, or something else entirely? What purpose does it serve, and why does it even exist in the first place? Was it the intention of the doctor from Canada all along to have Simon end up here? We don't know. Neither does Simon. From this narrative lead, the rest of the story unfolds satisfyingly, and with very well-paced twists and turns. Much of the exposition and world-building is accessed through computer terminals and audio logs, as well as some character interaction with Simon, and is achieved very convincingly and competently. Simon's arc eventually settles down on a singular goal, which you work towards throughout the game, though additional puzzle pieces for the setting and story are dropped right up to the conclusion of the game. Covering other aspects of the story and themes begins to encroach on spoiler territory, so if you would like to see more in-depth discussion of this, then you can find it after the review section of the video. Ultimately, if you enjoy more narrative and thematically driven single-player experiences, then SOMA has you more than covered. SOMA explores concepts such as identity, purpose and agency, and existentialism in a unique and thought-provoking way, and consistently does so for the entirety of the game. There are very few missteps in this area of the game, and those that are present are not large detractors from the game anyway. Story and themes are where SOMA really shines and will be the main selling point of the game for many players. Moving on to the next segment of the video, there will be heavy plot spoilers for SOMA going forward, so if you do not want to be spoiled and want to play the game fresh for the first time yourself, knowing as little as possible, you need to leave the video now. If you enjoyed the rest of the review, please feel free to leave a like, a comment, and even subscribe to the channel. And hopefully I'll be making more of these in the future for other games too. We all have games we wish we could play again for the first time. For me that would include MGS2, Red Dead Redemption, Mass Effect 1 and Fallout New Vegas, and now SOMA. SOMA can sometimes lay foreshadowing and certain thematics on very thickly, though even in such cases I feel it does an admirable job of doing so, especially for a video game, a medium which is often plagued by poor writing and ham-fisted attempts at making a point. The moment of transition between Simon and Pseudo-Simon is a great example of this foreshadowing. It is immediately obvious to the player that something is wrong, it'd be really hard to miss, but the reality of the situation is hidden from the player well enough to create compelling narrative tension. The only clue that the player has to go off of is the foreshadowing immediately prior to Simon's dialogue, about how Indians thought cameras would steal their souls, which is both obvious enough to establish the line of questioning about personal identity and ambiguous enough to not ruin the mystery. I also enjoy this moment because the continuity we observe between being sat in the lab and being in Pathos 2 cleverly presents the game as if it is one continuous story, but takes on a new light once you uncover the truth about Simon's having died a short month after the scan took place. Toronto isn't the opening to Simon's story, it's the end of his story and the prologue to another character's beginning, brilliantly disguised to subvert the player's agency in the game. You start the game with the goal of helping Simon and to keep him alive, and finish the game knowing nothing you can do will ever achieve that goal, and that the best you can do is keep a copy of him, something akin to alive, following an apocalyptic event, which, at least for me, made me feel as if I was acting in Simon's memory, rather than Simon's character, which sets, at best, a bittersweet tone for the game's outcome, before you even know how the story resolves. This is something that can only be achieved effectively through the medium of a video game. This whole cycle is then repeated in the epilogue section of the game, this time with the player burdened with the knowledge of what happened to Pseudo-Simon back at Pathos 2 shortly before. SOMA isn't an immediately amazing game though. Many games have hook moments, which are in my mind the points at which the player becomes sold on the premise of the game. Think about Joel's daughter in The Last of Us, or the first sighting of the Reapers in Mass Effect 1. In these cases, the hook moments come at the very start of the game. In SOMA, this moment came somewhat later for me, being the moment at which you enter this room, and are confronted with a computer terminal you need to power, and a robot jacking power from said terminal. When you commandeer the power for the terminal back for yourself, the robot speaks up and tells you to stop because it was hacked.
I need it. Why?
When this happened, I still didn't fully understand what was happening, nor do I think you were expected to, but I immediately felt a sense of regret and uncertainty about my actions going forward. Having robots express human emotions and desires is nothing new to sci-fi media, and it's been done well and badly several times over in the past. Legion from Mass Effect 3, one of your squad members, is a great example of this from gaming that's done quite well, but in the context of SOMA, this moment feeds into the themes of existentialism well. Whereas Legion is built from the ground up as an AI, the AI of SOMA are born from human lives and experiences, and thus the question of whether human experiences and emotions are what define us entirely is raised and left uneasily lurching over us. This idea is repeatedly reinforced in small ways throughout, Catherine being totally unaware of being repeatedly connected and disconnected from the computer systems around Pathos 2 reminds the player frequently that we are talking to an AI that acts like Catherine, rather than talking to Catherine proper. The game does make some missteps though, the most major of which in my eyes being the handling of the WoW. The WoW was clearly designed to have some parallels to HAL and the AM supercomputer from 2001 A Space Odyssey and I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, respectively. Where I feel this element of the world falls apart is twofold. Firstly, Catherine does at one point jab at Simon for using and integrating himself with the WoW when the player uses the various WoW healing points throughout the game. It is wholly unclear to the player what the real benefit of these healing points really do in the game, though seem to calm Simon sometimes. Their use is non-mandatory throughout most of the game. Most confusingly, after being told off by Catherine for using these healing points, there is seemingly zero consequence for using all healing points encountered, and no long-term benefit for doing so also. On many occasions I was unsure whether to keep using them or not, but in reality it doesn't really matter if you do or don't. The second issue I have with the WoW is with its role in the story. The WoW is used to well explain the existence of the monsters in the game and is used to explain how structure gel is used to accomplish this. What is not explained is how Johann Ross gains supernatural powers from the WoW. Also, it seems somewhat of a deus ex machina for Simon to be able to destroy the WoW by literally finding a physical manifestation of its heart and poisoning it. The need of a base-wide AI algorithm to centralise its entire existence in a single massive structure gel seems like wonky writing. The only other misstep of note I recall is one that Pseudo-Simon makes, and it comes off of the back of a well-executed moment of the game, sadly. When Simon is tasked with transferring his consciousness into another suit so that he and Catherine can descend to the last areas of the base, Simon is horrified to learn firsthand that consciousness cannot be transferred, only copied and emulated. This correctly sets the expectations for the player to be unable to enter the Ark as the current iteration of Simon. The problem is that, despite being shown this and subsequently taking large issue with it, Deep Sea Simon still for some reason seems to be caught off guard at the very end of the game when he is once again left behind after launching Ark into space. Despite these issues, I still feel SOMA is an incredible game that explores its themes compellingly and in a way that only video games can do. It may be a relatively short experience in comparison to other modern games, and it may not enjoy true mainstream popularity, but nevertheless I think SOMA will endure as a low-key achievement in gaming for a long time yet.
Catherine? Catherine! I can't believe we actually made it.
Well, we did.
I'm so relieved.
It's okay, Simon. Everything's all right now.
If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like and subscribe and leave any feedback in the comments. This is actually the first video that I've done video editing for. It's a new skill that I wanted to learn, and I'm sure I can improve in, a multitude of different ways. So if there's anything in particular, please let me know. And hopefully I'll see you again in the next video.